What comes to mind when I say the word serial killer? The very infamous Jack the Ripper? Maybe the alluring face of Ted Bundy. Yeah, I definitely said alluring. I mean, Zac Efron played him in a movie. I rest my case. Anyway, the dictionary attempts to define a serial killer as someone who commits a series of murders, often with no apparent motive and typically following a predictable behavior pattern. But what we need to realize is that you need to possess a kind of inhuman ability to witness and cause such grave harm to people. Hello, and welcome to Serial Killers 101. Today, we hope to address and shed some light on these infamous beings and the inner workings of their minds.
From the rise of Superstalker Joe in the Netflix show You to the casting of Zac Efron to play serial killer Ted Bundy in Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Wild, fans have turned towards the entertainment media to express their fascination and obsession with true crime. Michael Arnfield, a Canadian ex-cop and criminologist, expressed his views on how pop culture has led people to believe that serial killers are super intelligent beings with their diligent planning and over-the-top representation on TV. Hannibal Lecter in The Silence of the Lambs is among the popular favorites that feed on the audience's fascination with evil geniuses. These characters, however, are just a spiced up version of what really happens in real life. Filmmakers tend to dive into the minds of these predators in search of past trauma and inner demons, but quite often their motives are less complex. They're just average people with breathtaking side hobbies. Conversations with the Killer, the Ted Bundy Tapes, a four-part Netflix documentary series, depicted the true horrors of the crimes Bundy had committed. However, the grins, charms, and of course, the good looks of our High School Musical superstar Zac Efron relatively dilutes the harsh reality of Bundy's crimes, almost that it could be mistaken for a fictional thriller. Besides, not every murderer gets a film made on them. Only the ones with dashing personalities and killer ideas make the cut. Such a depiction in the media also provides incentives and ideas to potential predators out there. It induces the copycat effect, a term that was first introduced when people took inspiration from the works of Jack the Ripper. Man was on incognito before it was even cool. Hashtag influencer. Jokes apart, it was a dead serious situation back then. Another reason for the wide popularity of true crimes is believed to be the decline in serial killings since 70s, and thus there is an urge to increase such content in the entertainment sector. 30 years ago, you would not want to read about a murder that took place in your area in the local newspaper and then proceed to binge watch Hannibal. It would be horrifying. But times change. Today, however, your average Gen Z would want to watch all episodes in one night and then proceed to read 101 articles on all serial killers to have ever existed. On the other hand, there are a vast majority of people, especially women, who look at these films as a form of rescue. People are worried about being victims of these crimes, and this kind of media depiction offers them comfort because they view it as an escape. A downside of glorifying such genres is that they are centered on the intricately and elaborately planned murders carried out by the killer. Victims are shown as nothing more than footnotes in their lives. They are just thrown in as numbers, giving the killer main character energy. While not wrong, this often conditions the audience to see them as celebrities rather than the monsters that they truly are. Instead, if the mainstream media focused on the victims or rescuers' point of view rather than the murderers, there would be more awareness among the general public. Main character energy would shift to the rescuers, and this could have a tremendous impact on the youth. Be it lack of conscience or just plain obsession, the life stories of the killers we present to you will have you on the edge of your seats. So take a good look under your bed and outside your windows before we get to the first killer of our talk.
Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the rock and I'll be back. Like Independence Day with Jesus, June 6th, like the movie. Big mother ship and all. I'll be back, I'll be back. These were the last words of Aline Wuornos. So, who is she? Eileen Carroll Wuornos, presumed to be one of America's first female serial killers, murdered 7 men in Florida by shooting them at point blank range. What most people are not aware of is that these murders were the result of her deeply troubled childhood. Her parents separated before her birth, and her father was in and out of prison due to charges of child molestation. When Wuornos was 4 years old, she and her brother were sent to live with their grandparents. This was just the beginning. Wuornos says that her grandfather was an abusive alcoholic, and she later admits to having a brief sexual relationship with her brother. At the young age of 11, Eileen began having sex with her neighborhood boys in exchange for cigarettes and spare change, earning her nickname Cigarette Pig. At around 13, she became pregnant with the child of her grandfather's friend and gave birth to a baby boy at a home for unwed mothers. Her son was immediately put up for adoption, and this was the first of many traumatic experiences she ever had. Aline's grandmother passed away when she was just 15, and right after, her grandfather kicked both Aline and her older brother out of the house. She would sleep in the woods at the end of their street or in abandoned cars. She eventually dropped out of school in the 10th grade and supported herself with sex work and other odd service jobs. She wandered around the country, the feeling of abandonment increasing day by day. But the turning point in her life was when she met Tyra Moore, a hotel maid working at a lesbian bar. The attraction between them was instant, and the couple moved in together, living in various motel rooms across the state. Wuornos took care of them financially by making most of the money through sex work. In 1989, one fateful night, Aline got in a car with a man named Mallory as a part of her job. But in horrific turn of events, she claimed Mallory raped her. Wuornos claimed that this earlier convicted rapist had brutally beaten and tortured her, and in that state of mind, she shot him to death. She felt guilty and decided to leave the sex job and find an honorable job instead, but it proved to be much more difficult than anticipated. Tyra was frustrated sitting at home. She was also struggling due to the lack of money. Seeing her partner suffer, Aline went back to sex work and started earning money again. This was when the recurrent killing of men started taking place. Her victims ranged from 40 years old to 65. During work, if any of her clients would trigger her, even if it was just a little, she would shoot them to death, rob them, and leave their bodies in a faraway woodlands. After each killing, she came back home to Tyra as if nothing ever happened. With the money she earned, they would party and live happily. Eileen used the money to give Tyra the life she always wanted. As days passed, Eileen kept doing this and earned enough money to buy a beach house, which was Tyra's dream, without telling her where all the money was coming from. As they say, lies always do not get buried. One day, a major incident happened in their lives. When Tyra drove a car stolen by Eileen from one of her victims into a ditch in front of a family house, Eileen panicked and drove the car far away, parked it, and fled the scene. But the family that saw them had already reported it to the police. Tyra was shocked. She had no clue what was happening. She questioned Eileen, and that's when she finally told her about all the murders. Eileen got arrested by the police, and it turned out that they suspected her of the rash killing that happened in Florida, but she never confessed. The next day, police found Tyra in Pennsylvania, who Eileen claimed had run away after having a fight. The police brought Tyra down to Florida and made her speak to Eileen, hoping to get a confession. And on the third day, Aline finally confessed her crime and said that all the killing were in the name of self-defense. Her statement was recorded and she was convicted of 6 counts of first-degree murder and 6 death sentences. With Tyra acting as a witness, she was finally executed by lethal injection in 2002 at the age of 46. Aliens is a simple but a harrowing story, and no matter how much we try, we ultimately cannot help but sympathize with her past and the trauma she suffered. Or so, we may be inclined to think. The truth is a bit more convoluted than that. With another one of Aline's famous quote, I robbed them and I killed them as cold as ice, and I would do it again, and I know I would kill another person because I hated human for a long time, providing evidence that she had no remorse. Yet her murders were acts of self-preservation. Justified, sick, or just too complicated? We will let you decide.
Dennis Rader, an American serial killer, murdered 10 people over 3 decades. He called himself BTK because he bound, tortured, and killed his victims. He spent most of his childhood in Wichita, where he had a seemingly remarkable childhood. But in reality, from a very young age, Rader harbored sadistic sexual fantasies about torturing trapped and helpless women. He also exhibited zoo sadism by torturing, killing, and hanging small animals. On the surface, he led a fairly typical life. He served in the Air Force and eventually married and settled down and had 2 kids. He worked for 2 companies and then as a compliance officer. And to hammer in the family man image, he was also an active member of a church and a Boy Scout leader. Now, that's a lot of achievements for a serial killer, and I assure you, if Raider was an Indian, then he would have replaced Sharma Ji Ka Beta. But beneath the mask of a perfect family man was a heinous serial killer who would be driving down the street and on seeing a woman would say, You are next. On 15 January 1974, Raider turned to his first murder spree, strangling 4 members of a Tiro family before leaving with a watch and a radio as a souvenir. He also left semen at the crime scene, although nobody was sexually assaulted. Later that year, he wrote a letter which was found in a library detailing the January murders and saying that the code words for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them. BTK. In a span of next 3 years, he killed 3 more women. Following this, he grew irritated by the lack of media coverage. After all, who does not want attention? So, in a letter to a local TV station, he wrote, How many people do I have to kill before I get some national attention? The resulting coverage helped set off a panic. Despite his cat and mouse game with authorities, Raider was able to keep lid on his secret murderous life. He then waited for 8 years before striking again. During the school off period between murders, he took pictures of himself wearing women's clothes and a female mask while bound. He later admitted that he was pretending to be his victims as a part of his sexual fantasy. Along with this, during this time, he focused on work and family life. He and his wife had a son and a daughter. Following year, Reader graduated from a state university with a degree in administration of criminal justice. During this time, he also worked for a company where he installed security alarms as a part of his jobs in many cases for homeowners concerned about the BTK killings. After the cooling period was over in 1985, he murdered his neighbor and later took her body to his church where he photographed her in bondage. After that, he killed 2 more women, committing his last murder in 1991 by strangling a 62-year-old woman. And then, after that, he worked as a compliance officer, and according to the reports, He used to measure the height of the grass and lawns and chase stray animals. He took pleasure in exerting his limited authority over his neighbors and other members of the community. Now, until 2004, the investigation of the BTK killer was considered a cold case. It was the year when many news stories resurfaced, marking the 30th anniversary of the BTK's first murder. Reader responded to this by initiating a series of 11 communications to the local media. He often used serial boxes, possibly a reference to serial killer, to hold drawings, crime souvenirs, including photographs, written descriptions of murders, and even dolls, posed to mimic the various deaths. Then in January 2005, police received a break after recovering a serial box that included a note in which reader asked police whether they would be able to trace him through the floppy disk he wanted to send them. Police answered his question in a newspaper ad saying that it would be safe. Then he sent them a disk which the police quickly traced to his church, where he served as president. Investigators also noticed his chip on the security tapes of some of the package drop off areas. After that, the case was cemented by matching Raider's DNA to the semen found at the first crime scene, which was 30 years ago. He was then arrested soon and he confessed to the crimes after talking for about 33 hours straight. So, it was BTK's pathological need for attention that made him dig his own grave, eventually leading to his life imprisonment.
Ever wondered if the bogeyman is real? Well, he is, and not in the folklore sense. We indeed aren't talking about ghosts, but you decide if this person is any less harrowing. On the night of October 1st, 1979, a Goleta couple awakened to a blinding flashlight. The woman was ordered to tie up her boyfriend and made to lie face down, a pair of shorts over her head as blindfold. The intruder then entered the kitchen chanting, "I'll kill you." You know the times when this idea of survival gives us a surge of adrenaline. And this is how the woman was able to escape her bindings and flee out on the streets screaming. Living next door was an FBI agent who, alerted by the scream, came out just in time to see a man pedal fast furiously. He got into his car, and as he was gaining on the man, he'd already disappeared, dumping his stolen bike on a sidewalk. I know you all must be thinking, nothing really happened, so why this incident? The agent was questioned why he never shot the intruder, but all he heard was a woman's scream and had no clue that the man who escaped had turned into a full blown killer, as none of his victims survived after that night. A quarter of a century of frantic searching to discern him. Wouldn't it be undermining to introduce the man right now? Let us build a timeline. East Area Rapists, or the EAR's terror began in Sacramento on June 18, 1976. A masked man broke into the bedroom of a 23-year-old and raped her at knife point. After this, he assaulted not 10, not 20, but 50 women, from 13-year-olds to wives and mothers. Initially, he attacked lone women, but after the media pointed this out, his subsequent assaults were also on couples. Everything was a challenge for him. A serial rapist with a definite pattern, leaving behind numerous victims and clues, yet able to escape. His ultimate motive was to spread the fear of death. The victims were relieved only to be alive. It was like he was omnipresent, setting up the houses days before the attack, hiding shoelaces or tauntauls to be used as ligatures. His habits were unique and disturbing. He would place dishes over the other person in the house and say, "If I hear these rattle, I'm going to kill her." He used to walk around the house like he owned it. After tying up people, he used to go to the kitchen, have sandwiches, drink beer, then rape. 6 years after a couple was attacked, a formal diagnosis of the wife concluded that her central nervous system had been rewired because of the trauma experienced during those few hours. He would go silent for minutes, tricking people into believing that he had left, but then would come back only to assault again. The ONS, Original Night Stalkers murder, started in Southern California in 1979. They were classic EAR style attacks, but since the authorities had their differences, these murders were treated as stand-alone cases. The offender was a compulsive prowler and searcher. After the assaults, his first homicides were shooting deaths because of him acting defensively. Remember the night when a cold blooded killer transpired? In the next attack, he realized a substantial psychological relief. He brutally bludgeoned the couple to death with a log. The bark shattered all over the place. The act of bludgeoning continued and was arousing for him. He used to roam the vicinity fearlessly. For him, the pleasure was in part derived from raising the stakes. The killing spree stopped in 1981, the killer's 10th murder, and his last known victim was an 18-year-old young woman, Janela Cruz, in 1986, after his apparent 5 years break. Was this all? Crime writer Michelle McNamara coined the name Golden State Killer in early 2013. Around the same time, the cold case of Visalia ransacker came to light. The ransacker was a serial burglar, a sexual predator, and a budding serial killer who operated in Visalia, California in the mid 1970s. The strangest details of these 120 burglaries mirrored the attack by the EAR or the ONS. Multiple same day ransackings were common as well, including 12 separate incidents on November 30th, 1974. He victimized those he targeted by stealing personal and irreplaceable items like wedding rings and inherited jewelry. After his encounter with a detective, a composite sketch was released in the local press and he never struck Visalia again. Who were these offenders? Were they the same person? For the latter, there was no forensic match between the cases, yet a feeling that a single mind was at work. All were focused on destroying the emotional center of people's life. Flashlight, a frightening silhouette, ski mask, and a young man talking through clenched teeth. He had to be the same person, later proved by DNA testing. The investigation was a true convergence of emerging technology and dogged determination by detectives. Through DNA genealogy, the DNA profile of the suspect matched with some third cousins. Via tree building, 9 men were shortlisted. A detective then stumbled upon a news article relating to a police officer fired for stealing a dog repellent and a hammer. He was already on their list. Through further DNA testing, it was ruled out that he would have blue eyes and be prematurely bald. This is how the suspect finally got a name. Joseph D. Angelo. The end of a 4 decade hunt is down to testing a piece of tissue from his trash can outside, 100% matched to the Golden State Killer's DNA. What in his life created this monster? Or was he born like this? His victims would often hear him say, "I hate you, Bonnie," or he would sometimes start sobbing in a corner. Joe, born in New York in 1945, shifted to an army base in Germany. Their father would lock them up in closets and do corporal punishment on them. Joe always got the worst. Humanity couldn't presume what effect watching his 7-year-old sister being raped by 2 men had on him. His parents divorced, he joined the Navy and got engaged to Bonnie Colwell, which ended badly. Moving to Exeter, he married 20-year-old Sharon Huddle. In 1973, he became a police officer and the Visalia ransacking cases began. 3 years later, ransacking ceases and he joins the police force. The EAR attacks started that summer, terrorizing Sacramento until he was arrested for shoplifting and was fired from the force. The ONS murder stopped in 1981, the year his daughter was born. No murders occurred for the next 5 years, his last known assault. In the 90s, Sharon moved out with the three daughters, but the pair never legally split, and he started working as a mechanic. In March 2018, he retired, and a 72-year-old Joe, living with his granddaughter, was arrested the following month. On August 21st, 2020, D'Angelo was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Eventually, justice was served. But isn't it sickening how Joseph spread the morbid darkness of the heinous crime that happened to his sister? The irony is in his threat. You will be silent forever, and I'll be gone in the dark.
By now, you've heard quite a few tales of offenders and their portrayal in media, but have you ever looked at a serial killer and wondered what's going on inside their head? I can guess what's been going on in yours. You've been a little uncomfortable with the gory details or been calling those people psychopaths, but a lot of factors support the activities and the making of a serial killer. Most of us fear consequences. It stops us from doing anything wrong, but due to biological damages, certain people lack the emotion of fear or empathy. Sometimes we go through disturbing situations at a very young age that leaves a mark on us, like the Golden State Killer watching his sister being violated. Or sometimes we lack respect or relationships, satisfaction. And while most of us can cope with the inadequacies, some people aren't able to. Often the murder also depends on the victim. Children, prostitutes, people living alone, they are the easiest to begin with and the hardest to trace. Even modern society and media play a significant role in this. For instance, do you know all the people living around you? Are you sure that no one in your surroundings could be a serial killer? Most of us won't be able to confirm that, which is an underlying reason for these crimes. We are in a society of strangers due to urbanization, which makes us a potential victim or a potential offender. My next question is, do you get inspired when you see celebrities? It's normal even for me when I watch Olivia Rodrigo, who is just my age. Media has a way of portraying certain things as dominant. And for a serial killer, the celebrities are people like Ted Bundy, born with a genetic predisposition, growing up in difficult environment. A potential murderer is bound to be inspired by the fame Ted has for all the wrong reasons. And all these contribute to create a serial killer. But when we look at the crime scene, now there's another story. Firstly, not all serial killers are psychopaths, and nor are your friends when you call them that so lightly. There are tons of complex factors that make someone a real psychopath. Secondly, do you ever go out with a good mood and then it rains, making you squashy, irritated, and wanting to kill someone? With my sour luck, it happens every time I'm out. But what I want you to focus on is that initial good mood. Because not every serial killer has a plan to murder. They might just go to work as usual and something triggers them so they wish to kill. But unlike us, they are actually capable of doing it. Sometimes even the killer doesn't understand what or why he or she is doing this, but all they know is in that moment they need it and they can't stop. Some of them already have criminal records like burglary, and as they remain undiscovered, their activities only intensify under the motivation of their ongoing success. The next common phenomena is like that of the BTK, taunting the officials. And you may think he's a fool for writing letters, but come on. Many times we also taunt or threaten our siblings. It's a way to wield power and control, and a lot of serial killers survive that way. If you have been under suppressive circumstances constantly, but suddenly you have the control of life and death in your hands, you can't give it up no matter what the consequences, then that is what we call the God complex. Interesting research has also shown that 1 in 6 serial killers are female. There are differences in the way females make their kill. Their key weapon is usually poison, and unlike males, they do not often sexually violate the victims because their motives are mostly resources. Then comes the fact that they often belong to feminine professions like teaching or nursing, and the victimized people they know, making them less susceptible and harder to track. After hearing all this, you might have some insights into why or how a human being could commit such heinous crimes. But are serial killers born or made? Well, as Jim Clements said, genetics load the gun, psychology and personality aim it, and experience pulls the trigger.
So there it was. All the accounts and others of these notorious beings we define to be serial killers. Thank you so much for attending the talk. We hope you enjoyed it. Check out the Blank 101 Instagram and Twitter page to explore more content like this. Club members, please do join the feedback session. And we hope, sincerely hope, that you'll be able to have a good night's sleep tonight because we definitely will not be. Hi.